Yeah, just as a side note, I was telling my wife about this topic and it was like, I am bad for this phubbing, by the way. So we'll get into that in a sec.
Okay.
All right, so welcome to Researching Happy. This is episode 51, and on this show we have critical conversations about wellbeing promotion, positive psychology, and multidisciplinary wellbeing science. So in a casual conversational format with experts from around the world. So we've just come off of a debate with someone from your side of the world, Carli. So first of all, welcome Dr. Carli Ochs to the show. We've just had a debate with Todd Kashdan from George Mason University. If I understand, that's near you.
It is.
And so now we're going to the other end of the career spectrum, someone who's just recently finished their PhD in the last 2 years, but from the same side of the world. So welcome, Carli, and yeah, thanks for coming. Thanks for joining.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, so tell us about yourself. Where are you and what are you up to?
Yeah, so I am currently in Washington, D.C. I've been here now for almost 2 years, and I'm doing a postdoc in Dr. Kushlev's Happy Tech Lab. Yeah, before that I was in Switzerland. I grew up there, and I got a grant from the Swiss National Science Foundation to come here to work with an expert in my field, and I picked him. So, and yeah, almost done with that period already.
Really? Oh, okay. So yeah, I mean, that was my first question, was basically, how did you end up in Switzerland?
Yeah,
And
how did I end up here?
Yeah, there you go. I did not guess that. I would not have guessed that. So, I mean, the background is that I saw your presentation at the SPSP conference and was just so impressed by what you were doing. It's so interesting. So, I mean, what drew you to researching the impact of technology on happiness? Yeah, like basically, how did you get into this field?
Yeah, so I think a little bit of like egocentrism. I started my PhD at 22, 23, and I was working in a team that did research on human-computer interaction. And to me, that seemed like the most relevant question in the field because it was affecting me and my friends. And I wanted to know how I should behave with my phone and how I can use my phone to optimize my well-being. And I haven't figured it out, so I'm still here. But yeah, that was kind of, I think, the start was just like kind of looking around and being like, this seems to be a problem. I don't know what the answer is, and let's research it.
Yeah, wow. And what of like the big? So you grew up in Switzerland. Are your parents American or something? Or
I have an American mom. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. All right. Interesting. And so, what are the big differences? Like you've done some research. Like, you know, we kind of try to go into the stories behind the studies is kind of the idea. So, what are the big differences between researching in the US versus researching in Switzerland?
Well, I mean, a big difference, I think, is here I'm at a way bigger institution. So I feel like there have been way more like possibilities of like interactions with like researchers that are like visiting researchers coming through for talks and so forth. There's just like way more happening. Also just within the city, like Washington, D.C. versus the smaller city that I was in Switzerland, not the same possibilities. But culturally, like Switzerland was like very different in terms of like we were like, I think it's more social, maybe like as like a smaller department, but like everyone would go for lunch together. So like there were different connections being made like across teams and so forth. And then in terms of like impact of culture on my research, I did do a study in Switzerland and one in the US while I was here, and they were quite similar, and we didn't find the same effects. And I think that it might have to do with like the way university is set up, because we were doing research on like college students, and we found that like if we told students to not use their phones in the break in the US, they talked more to each other and felt happier, like on a 5-minute break. And we did something similar in Switzerland, and we didn't find those effects. Like we didn't find an increase in social interaction, and we didn't find an increase in mood. And the studies weren't exactly the same from the design, so I can't be like, this is for sure the reason. But one of the differences between the groups is I noticed that in Switzerland, students were more socially connected. Overall, they reported knowing their classmates better.
Okay.
And having more close friends.
Yeah. Okay. So it's kind of like maybe in the US, you were fixing a problem that didn't exist in Switzerland or something like that.
But that's very, very contextual, because I think the problem is probably in both places. But like in Switzerland, I think like just the way university is set up, the students like all had the same classes. Like their psych degree, you know, like it's like they all knew each other, while in the US it was like more, so it's like very contextually based. Like I'm like to this specific scenario, maybe even to these specific universities, but those are differences that I noticed that I didn't think of beforehand. That can just show quickly how differences can be there. This is a very deep dive into the data at the beginning of like what were differences, but those were some of the differences.
No, this is cool. And I mean, a nice, well, I don't think we've talked much about cross-cultural research so far, but was that all in English or was it in two different languages?
It's actually in 3 different languages
Oh,
because
okay.
the university that we tested in Switzerland is bilingual, and we tested in multiple classes, and we
Oh,
gave them the
wow.
option to answer in their like main language.
Sure,
Like,
sure. Wow, yeah, okay, so that's even more complicated. Very interesting. Okay. And tell me about Happy Tech. That is such a cool name for a lab.
yeah.
What
So
kind of
the
stuff
lab,
happens there?
well, at the moment, so I'm a little bit separate because I came with the grant that I wrote, but the lab in general is very focused. At the moment, they just received 2 different grants to look at like changes in schools, like the policies coming into schools, like around the country and also just around here. So comparing like social media use, sorry, not social media use, but yeah, school bans and like
Hmm.
different types of school bans and rollout of policies across the country and evaluating which ones are more effective. But they
Yeah.
just started this work, and I'm really excited to see
Yeah, far. I mean,
what's
that's
going to come
obviously
out.
like, yeah, it's a big deal. Very cool. And so, like, let's talk a little bit about the work that you've been up to in the past. So, in the recent past, I guess, but you've studied how smartphones influence social interactions, including this thing called phubbing, which is a
Mm-hmm.
hilarious name. I had to Google it. I'd never heard of it before. Could you define phubbing for people listening and talk? Let's talk about like its consequences, and then we can sort of zoom out and explain how phones affect social interactions a bit more generally. So,
Mm-hmm.
what is phubbing?
So phubbing is it's like a composite word of like the word phone, like a portmanteau word of the word phone and snubbing. So snubbing, phone,
I did not get
phubbing.
that. Yeah.
Yeah. And so phubbing is defined as like the act of ignoring someone with a smartphone. What's very important in the definition is like it's the person who's being ignored. It's important that they are the ones that are being perceived as being ignored. Like it's important that they feel that they are ignored,
Mm,
regardless of the intention of the person using the phone.
right. Exactly. Yeah. Okay.
And
Man, this is massive. This happens every day, all day. No?
it happens every day, all day. But what's like very complicated about measuring it is like what happens every day, all day is people use their phones in social interactions. And then like it might change from one moment to the next, right? You might pull out your phone, like we might be like together, you pull out your phone. And I don't feel ignored because I'm doing something else. And then I'm done doing whatever I'm doing. And then I'm like, I kind of feel ignored right now. So like it might change like during an interaction,
Yeah.
and it's very hard to observe and to know. And because the research is kind of complex in that sense to like figure out, like when is somebody feeling ignored, when it is a problem, and when is it just a person using a phone in a social interaction.
So, yeah. So tell me, like, is it, yeah, I'm imagining like, this kind of thing of like, I've got my phone right here. Just hang on a sec. Just hang on a sec. Is it that, like, is it that kind of thing or is it more?
Yeah, so there are studies that have shown that like if you give an excuse, like, for
Okay.
example,
Yeah.
it doesn't really affect the person negatively.
Okay.
So I mean, these are obviously like lab studies. So like I don't know to what extent that like, like would translate to you doing it like constantly to your partner, for example. That might grind on them. But
It
so like
does. Yeah. I can tell you that now. I've done
but
the research.
there are moderating effects like that. Like so if you give an excuse or if the person knows like what you're doing, then like it might not have as much of a negative effect. But the interesting thing about the phone is, in my opinion, and there's been like comparative studies with like newspapers, I think in books, like someone reading a book versus someone reading a newspaper versus someone on the phone, is like we don't know what you're doing on the phone. Like if you're reading the news, like you feel maybe more comfortable interrupting the person, you know what they're doing. You also don't feel like ostracized because like
Hmm.
if you're on the phone like doing this, like I might be excluded from a social interaction basically. Like you're talking with someone else, you're not talking with me. Versus if I see you on the news reading a newspaper, I'm like, yeah, you're reading the newspaper.
Yeah, yeah. And it's amazing how like quickly these, what would you call it? These behaviors have, I guess what I would call maybe slipped. Like this idea of like, it might have felt unthinkable to answer a phone call at like the dinner table, say, and just sit at the dinner table and have your conversation. But, people do that now all the time. And I would probably say that's like a rude thing to do. I've probably done it myself a million times.
Yeah.
But that's that direct idea of having a conversation in my other, we were having a conversation. Now you're on the phone to someone else.
Exactly. And I think we'll get probably to it later when we have the conversation about like phone bans in general. But I'm very pro having like very strong social norms around when a phone is appropriate to pull out or not, because it's very hard to have that self control as if you're experiencing phubbing. all the time and phubbing your partner, then you probably know, because I'm sure that it's not malicious. Like you're not like pulling out your phone and being like, I'm going to ignore her now. So I think that
Very charitable of you. Thank you.
it's important to, like, in the family that I grew up in, it was very clear that no one could have their phone out at the table, for example. And that's like a rule that, like, I now in my social life, if someone pulled out their phone, they generally don't dare, because they know what I do my research on. So like, or if like they're like looking at me kind of nervous or ask. But yeah, I would strongly encourage that to anyone who listens, to like advocate for that in like situations where one does not want phones to be out. And I think we could all agree that generally at dinner, hanging out with friends are not moments where we want to be having our phones out.
Yeah, I mean, I remember being a kid and like, or whatever, teenager, and all the adults were like, you kids are just like sitting there on the table texting each other, and soon you're not even going to talk to each other. And now I'm older and I look at kids at tables and I have that exact, and I think that is what they're doing. They're literally not talking to each other, or they're sitting around on a couch, just like lying, and their lips aren't moving at all.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, people are. That's the other. So I've been very interested in social interaction. And one of the reasons for it is social interaction is a very like reliable predictor for well-being.
Yeah.
And the interesting part is like phones are actually originally designed to communicate, right? So we would expect social interaction or phones through social interaction to increase well-being.
Mm-hmm.
But like research overall seems to show that that's not the case. We're finding more like negative effects of phone use. And so the question is kind of like why? And like one reason might be because they're like interrupting social interactions, like phubbing, for example, but also like they're like hindering social interactions from even like occurring. Like the study that I mentioned earlier with the breaks in the schools and the university classes, like students were not talking to each other when we told them to use their devices. When we told them to put them away, they immediately started talking to one another. And there have been other studies who have shown that, like, I don't know, Dr. Kushilev has another study where they were able to show that in like a waiting room, people smile at each other less if they had access to the phone.
Really?
Yes. And I think that
I don't know why I'm laughing at that. It's disgraceful.
And I think the phone is probably like amplifying a problem that is already there, because like people, I think that like the phone is interrupting close relationships. Like the phubbing, I think, occurs more with people that one knows rather well. And in the case of strangers or people that like we don't know very well, there's a lot of research documenting that it's like scary to talk to those people because we don't know how the social interaction is going to go, because we think that it's not going to be that beneficial to our well-being, when in fact it's just as beneficial as like interacting with people we know very well. The phone, I think, is like, like it's used to like as a social support, as a comfort blanket. And so if I'm feeling insecure, I might just go on my phone instead of starting a conversation with someone that I don't know too well, which is where like it would like hinder these social conversations. And with teenagers, we can imagine that like teenagers feel awkward all the time, right? That they definitely are talking to each other less because of this.
There you go. And I was just thinking about like the research methods that are used, because it would be great to hear a bit of an overview of the stuff that you presented at SPSS, just to give a bit of a context of how you do this research. Because I'm thinking you'd almost want to do like an EMA style research study where you're capturing data like throughout the day. But that might be its own source of phubbing.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. It's very tricky to do that for that reason. Like also there are like digital detox EMA studies, and then like you're asking them to go on the phone while they're digital detoxing.
Yeah. Okay. And just and for people that haven't heard of EMA before, this idea that you'd receive like a text message, 5 times throughout the day. So it's sort of checking in. So that idea of, digital detox while the researchers are sending you text messages all day.
Yeah. And so I think that could definitely be interesting. And I think there have been studies I haven't read this one in a long time, but I think that there is a study that looked at like how people were doing and if they had their phones out in the last social interaction. And I don't remember what the findings were, but I'm assuming they were not. But but in my really did like a field experiment where we told students that they should not use their devices during this 10-minute break or 5-minute break. And in the 2 other conditions, we were actually interested, because we were so focused on the idea of social interaction. We asked them to either use their devices to communicate with someone, or to not, like, to use their devices but not to use it in a communicative way. And we assumed that like the condition that would have the most positive effect on their perceived social connectedness and mood would be the no tech, and then that it would probably be the communicative tech use over the non-communicative tech use condition.
Mm-hmm.
And while we found that people were more socially connected in the communicative tech condition, they were they were not happier. They were not in a better mood in that condition. And yeah, and I'm assuming it's because of well, for several reasons. I think that they might have not actually, like, they might have just been sending out messages and not getting anything back. So there might have been an element of asynchronicity there. And another element might have just been that you lose a lot of like, you know, like social cues, facial cues, like that enrich a social conversation. There's a lot of opportunities for miscommunication and misunderstandings via text messages. So there are a lot of reasons why like conversing over text, which was the case in this study, like they were not calling in this break, they were texting one another, would have less beneficial effects.
I don't want to like overextend the results that you've found so far or anything like that, but this idea that we're all worried about the mental health of university students and the isolation of university students, and such a simple intervention as between breaks, don't go on your phone, is enough to improve well-being and connection.
Yeah. I was told that it was like, I remember talking it out with someone and they were like, it's not going to be enough. 5 minutes is not going to be enough. And I was like, well, that's all I have. Like, I can't like interrupt the class for more time than that. And then I was like, well, it worked.
There you go. What measures did you use for well-being, by the way? Sorry to put you totally on the spot.
We operationalized it as mood, and I'm trying to think about the scale that we used, but we measured positive and negative affect.
Yeah. Okay. That's all I need to know. Yeah. So, I mean, that could be more transient, I guess, than sort of like more general, bigger, you know, like things like life satisfaction
definitely.
But still, I mean,
it's a momentary intervention as well. It's 5 minutes. It would be crazy to expect a difference on like life satisfaction from that intervention. But
if you did that every day for your entire semester.
Yeah. And well, for the study that we did at Georgetown, we actually noticed that we did the study over the entire semester with the same students, where we kept like changing the conditions. So it was like a repeated measures study. We, according to the students and the professor in the room, like the room got louder during the breaks where they were not supposed to use their devices, which makes sense if you think that like they might have not known people at the beginning and then like they were actually like making friendships and hanging out, and that would make sense that the volume would go up. But I remember when you came to the conversation at SPSP, there were people who were like, and maybe like then these people feel emboldened to like, because they had this positive experience, to go out and talk to more strangers, and then they make even more connections. And I was like, yeah, I mean, I wouldn't claim that from my 5-minute intervention, but that would be amazing.
I mean, anyone who's been lonely in a room would know how what a change that could occur. Like I agree with that. If you're just sort of sitting there, like say a conference is a perfect example, because you're sort of in a sense forced to be lonely. You know, like you're at a conference with 2,000 people and you might know nobody there. If they just said literally sit and talk to the person next to you for 5 minutes, you know, I think you did that in your presentation, right? Didn't you? Thank you. I'm just realizing now the genius behind that.
I mean, I'm not the one who invented that.
No, sure, but you gave us a prompt question, right? I can't remember what was the prompt question.
I think they were related to social interaction. I don't know that people actually worked on the prompt questions, but like the whole point was just to interact. Like I think like, it was like researchers in a room. So I think a lot of people were like, I'm from this institution and I do this research, instead of like answering the prompts.
Yeah, okay, fair enough. But you know, that's exactly what we're talking about. You do, I don't know, like emboldened's a weird way to talk about it, but this idea of like encouraged, you just feel that you can actually approach other people because you've seen a room of people engaging with each other. And you can imagine that would be pretty radically different to like a silent room. I think volume, it's interesting that you talked about volume. I think that would actually be something really interesting to measure. Like,
I was so disappointed that we didn't. I was really like, and then we had recordings of some of the classes. So I tried to like get it from that, but obviously the audio wasn't good enough because it was just from like the lecturer's computer.
Oh, right. That's interesting, because we do this activity we do a lot of interventions and programs and talks, and we always rely on this one little activity called Meaningful Pictures that comes from Mike Steger's work. And it's basically saying like, go on your phone. That's just funny. That's a phone thing. I didn't think about this, but go on your phone. And like, if we're looking for resources for your mental health, that's a hard thing to consider or to remember, what's important to me or what gives my life purpose. That's a big question. But you have a cheat sheet on your phone, which is all the photos that you've got, the photos you've taken or that people have sent to you.
Mm.
And so we say, like, go on your phone, just like in the last like 20 photos or something, find a small thing that represents meaning and purpose to you. And the volume in the room, it goes, and then obviously like mention it to the person next to you and go forwards and backwards. And the volume, you have to shout to get people to stop talking. And it's awesome. Like sometimes I just don't interrupt. And I know one of our team members used to bring a bell, basically,
Yeah.
because it's the volume is really, really, it's almost like in a loud backdrop, you are more free to talk. Whereas if it's a totally silent room, if like there must be a critical mass or something, where if I don't know, 10%, if 90% are on their phone, you're not going to start up a conversation. If like 60% are on their phone, you might, I don't know.
I think there you bring up a very interesting point regarding like how I mentioned earlier how I was like pro phone ban, and like one of the reasons was as well like I was like we need phone bans to help us like go on our phones less, like because it's like a lot of like self-control that is needed for myself to regulate myself. But also like if I go off of my phone, just me, and no one else is doing the
Yeah.
work, the problem isn't solved. Like no one's going to be interacting with me because they're going to be all on their phones. So it's really something that as a society we need to address so that we interact more with one another.
Yeah, and so you had I think you started your slides with this really interesting quote. I mean, hopefully I'm not mistaking
No,
presentations, but I don't think so. This idea that, well, I mean, do you remember it off the top of your head?
yeah, I don't think I remember who the quote is from though.
That's fine.
But I think it was like when you invent the ship, you also invent the shipwreck.
Yes.
And then I talked about how I'm not anti-technology.
Yes,
And
exactly.
yeah.
And I just thought that was so interesting because so you've invented the ship. With that comes the shipwreck, and now you have to figure out what to do about that, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so let's go there now. So we've got these smartphones. Like I was thinking about this yesterday. I actually recorded a podcast yesterday morning. So that was a conversation with people from around the world. Then I went to work. On the way to work, I stopped and had a Zoom conversation off my phone, with people in Tasmania, which is another state in Australia.
Mm-hmm.
And I just was thinking like I could never have had this, like talking about like my family life, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
I had 3 meetings around the world in the day, whilst
Mm-hmm.
playing with my kids, so
Mm-hmm.
in another world, I would have either been at work, like in the office, from 8:30 till 6 p.m. or something like that, or traveling, or have to pick
Mm-hmm.
up my family and move somewhere. So, we're clearly not anti-tech.
Mm-hmm.
There are huge benefits that come from it, but we have to look out for the shipwreck. So let's talk about, just broadly, what are the things that you see from, is it social media that you focus mostly on? Is it apps? Is it phones in general?
I focus more on phones in general. And I mean, it's a very like, I think that your question is like pointing to the fact that, yeah, it's very hard to research because like there's the phone in itself, which is just like the device. And then there are so many things that we can do on the phone. And then how we use them will differ greatly. Like in that study that I was talking about, we compared like communicative versus non-communicative use, which we could kind of control, but like it's very hard to like measure in practice because like your use is constantly changing. There have been people who've tried to do it with like habitual and non-habitual use, or meaningful or non-meaningful, or active or passive use. And the truth is we're constantly switching how we're using
Yeah.
it, so we can't really look at that. And then also how and what people are doing on their phones is constantly like different. Like you might be using social media, but you might be using like a completely different type of social media. Like, is it like visually based? Or is it like Reddit, for example? Like that might have very different effects. And like, so there's like what you're doing, it's where you're doing it. Like, are you in a social environment? Should you like, are you driving? Are you? And then also I realized I was always talking about context and content, like what you're doing and in what context. But I also realized that probably you would want to include like affective states as well in this model, because I would assume that like potentially depending on like why you're using your phone also might have to do with like how you're feeling in the moment. And that might have an effect on like how
Yeah.
positive or negative the phone is on
Yeah.
you in that moment.
Like avoidant phone use or something like that.
Yes. So, so in the last few years I've really been focusing on this like social aspect and like in social situations, the phone is probably just not beneficial, period. Like you should probably just avoid to have your phone out in most situations. And there's actually very little research on like how you can like what are like benefits, like positive effects of the phone. Like all the research is actually like showing no effects or negative effects of the phone.
In adults
One
and youth, or just
Yeah.
youth?
Yeah, both. I think one study that's interesting that came out of that Dr. Kushlev did is that he did this study where people had to find a room on campus and they either had access to their phone or they had to rely on asking people for directions. And
Okay.
the people who are in the phone condition, like they found the rooms faster and they were in a slightly better mood, but they felt less socially connected than the people who had to ask for directions. And
Interesting.
that kind of canceled out the positive effects of mood. And it's kind of interesting because you would think like that actually like Google Maps would be like a net benefit, right? Like if you think of like positive effects of phones, you'd be like, that's really, really useful.
Yeah.
But there are still like opportunity costs to that situation even.
There you go.
But again,
Yeah.
like not telling you to ditch your phones. Google Maps is very, or just Maps is very, very useful. But yeah, to show that it's like hard to like single out positive effects.
Yeah, I'm just thinking like I don't even know what research methods you could even use because most of the stuff that people do to collect data is on phones. You're reminding me, I went to the University of Twente in the Netherlands and they had
Mm-hmm.
this building that was just like a maze. It was just like,
Mm-hmm.
what's going on here? And someone said, I don't know if this is true or not, but they said the design was by an architect who wanted to encourage more conversations because it was sort of saying like, how do I get out of this building basically, or where's this room? Because it was really confusing.
Yeah.
So
And did it work?
I have no idea. I mean, yeah, I guess I was asking for directions, but maybe I got there when maybe it was built when the phones didn't have
Weren't
good maps on
around.
them. Yeah.
I think another thing that I do have to caution with what I was just saying is like the research, like research is also like biased towards looking at negative effects. Like we've been very
Hmm.
concerned about that. There's been a lot of hype in the media. So there's also been like criticism towards the fact that we are like looking for the negative effects. We're not really looking for positive effects.
Yeah.
But still, I think the study that I mentioned earlier is a good indicator for like it would probably not be that easy to do.
Yeah, that's right. And so, but I'm thinking even like, I don't know the studies exactly, maybe you know them, but would they just ask kids like, do you think school would be better without your phone? And most of them go, yeah, it would be.
Mm-hmm.
I know that's not
Yeah.
like the strongest
Yeah, but
methodology, but it's an
it
important thing it's like an important thing to listen to.
it's an important thing to listen to when you think about the fact that kids actually like generally do want phones. Like they generally like they will want a phone. That they're though saying that school would be better without one is a very powerful message then.
This is interesting. Okay, so when you said something interesting in your presentation about bands, and I think
Mm-hmm.
you were kind of, and you just alluded to it before. So in general, I think you said, like, I'm totally paraphrasing, so just correct me, but something like, I'm not generally for banning things in general, but the effect of these phones are so addictive and so like uncontrollable basically that you would actually be in favor of banning. I can't remember whether that was in the context of schools or just in general.
I think I gave wider examples. I said schools, but I was also like maybe like that could be extended to like I don't know, a meeting for example, like very specific scenarios. Maybe like there have been, like clubs, like like
Like comedy
restaurants.
clubs and
Yeah, like comedy clubs, like places where like the idea is to come and interact with people and not to have the phones out. Concerts would be like another good example, like because that's something that's often talked about is like just people having their phones out and filming. It's a little bit of a different problem, but I could imagine that that would be a place where people could in general agree that it would probably make sense
yeah.
to not have phones.
Yeah.
And
Have you
schools, I think it's a very easy one to consider like not having them.
Have you ever seen those? I know they do it in comedy clubs. I've never seen it though. I think there's like these bags that you put your phones in. I don't know what they are, but have you looked at that? Has anyone researched those?
I
They're
don't
like
know, but like
security bags that.
in the context of school bans, I'm sure that people are currently researching them because some of the schools are using these systems
Mhm.
or like similar systems. So I'm assuming that there is, if not published research, like upcoming research where
Mhm.
that will be
Yeah.
considered.
Okay, cool. And so, I mean, yeah, you've mentioned it a little bit before, but we are seeing moves in the US and in Australia to ban smartphones in schools, in the name of mental health, basically, right? So I'm
Hmm.
always my ears prick up a bit when I hear like something's being done in the name of mental health because I often think that might not actually have the desired effect. But for someone who's been focusing on this topic, what is your take on the bans in school specifically?
Yeah. Well, I'm pro, because if like we zoom out, we're like, well, why would they have like maybe like ask the question the other way around, like why would they have phones in schools? I can't think of a very like good reason why kids should have phones in schools. Like
I was like,
maybe
cool.
for going to school or
Right.
like coming home from school, but like once they're at school, I don't know
Yeah.
if you can think of a reason.
I don't know, so you can cyberbully people. I don't know.
Yeah, I think a parent who's a social worker who works in this space and like goes into schools and talks. And I think I asked her before this call, like what like are lists of like reasons why kids say they need their
Oh yeah,
phones.
yeah,
And she mentioned that talk to their parents is one of the
yeah. I
reasons.
was gonna say, like, call your mom and tell her that you left your lunch at home or something.
Exactly. Find their friends at recess was another reason.
Ridiculous.
And those were the reasons mentioned by students. And
Uh-huh.
find your friends at recess, I also find hilarious. Like, I did have a phone at the end of like my school time, but like I never used it for that purpose. And then in the US, gun violence is frequently cited as a reason. And teachers like to use it like for projects. Like, they want to use the phone for students to answer like quizzes or for them to like take
Oh,
photos that they
serious?
can then upload. Yeah. And so, like, some teachers are really pro phones for that reason, because they like are like, I guess, being trying to be
Educational.
educational, trying to be modern. But like, I guess we could do like cameras could be used, or there could be an iPad for that reason in the class. I don't think that that's a strong enough argument for having phones in schools. Like, none of those arguments convince me. And I'm pretty sure, or I am sure, that the gun violence one has also been like debunked, because there's like, your kid's not gonna like, the phone's not gonna help them in this specific
Yeah.
scenario.
Yeah.
If like, it could be more of a distractor and lead kids to like not follow the teacher's instructions, and instructors will have phones.
There you go. If anyone listening, you can call up Carli and tell her all the reasons why she's wrong. But it's really interesting because, like, watching Jonathan Haidt, go on his sort of crusade against this, he's getting so much hate, so much hate.
Mm-hmm.
And you go like, well, it actually sounds pretty reasonable to me.
Mm-hmm. I remember talking to you about it when we met at the conference, and I was like, who's the big lobbyist behind this? Like, big phone? Why are people? And then I was like, actually, probably maybe social media companies. But like, I
Big
don't
phone.
understand. But I don't know why. Because like, what is the harm of taking them away? Because people are talking about like, well, like, there might be unintended negative consequences of taking phones away. And I'm like, well, kids at school are either in class or at recess. What would be the consequence of taking the phone away in this situation? Like, I don't quite see the
Yeah,
argument there.
it's an unfair argument. Excuse me. It's an unfair argument too, because you are overlooking the potential harms that were trodden on when we introduced them.
Mm-hmm.
You're
Yeah.
basically saying, you're assuming that it comes with an assumption that this is the norm now, when it's clearly not. In the history of humanity, it's not the norm. But you're coming
Yeah.
from this assumption of like, well, here's the baseline now. That's what we've got. Why are you going to take this away from us?
No, and people were also like, like, well, we used to be panicking about like, people panicked about like, like
Oh,
TVs and
TV. Yeah.
radios. And I'm like, yeah, but like, if you let your kid watch less TV because of some moral panic, like, I don't think there would have been that big of a negative consequences on your kid to have watched a little less TV. Same for phones. Like, if your kid has a little like less phone time or can't take their phone to school, I don't think it's going to have a major impact on students.
Yeah, and I think you raised that really nice point that you can't, like you said, you because I guess when you're talking ban, I don't know whether you're saying like a strict ban or like a strongly enforced social norm or something. There's different ways of like reducing phone use. But this idea that even if we take, for example, the idea of volume, that my phone use is likely influenced by other people's phone use. It's almost like secondhand smoke or
Yeah.
something like that. This
Yeah.
idea of, if I don't want to smoke, but I go into a restaurant and everyone else is smoking, well, I'm probably going to smoke too. Or I mean, that's a different issue. I'm inhaling your smoke, whatever. But this idea of like, I walked into a lecture class and everyone's on their phone. I might have walked in talking to someone and we're going to immediately stop talking because we've walked into a quiet room.
Mm-hmm.
So there is this kind of, I don't know, contagion sort of thing.
Yeah, and speaking of that, like, schools who have, like, I know this from my parent who works in this space, like, who's going into schools, like schools who have implemented bans, like, apparently like the school reports that just like the school is louder as a consequence.
Really?
Yes. I mean, this is obviously like, like their impressions and perceptions. It's not
Yeah, yeah, no,
measured,
no.
but like I believe them.
Yeah.
And I'd love to do a study that somehow measures sound. Like I
There
think it
you
would be
go.
like just a very fun study, like measuring like the as one measure, like a before and after of a phone band going in, and if volume does change.
Yeah, like decibels for well-being. That's
Mm-hmm.
interesting. I think it's really interesting. And we used to have this hilarious, like I don't spend much time there anymore, but we used to be part of this research institute that because it was so open plan, like the office layout, people used to walk, like we would have visitors come all the time, but it was all these researchers just like in this big farm of laptops just silently working,
Mm-hmm.
and people would come from the elevator having this conversation on the elevator, like if we had a visitor or something, and then they would just walk in and just like freeze, because like I'm in a
I'm
room now
interrupting.
of
Yeah.
100 people. I'm interrupting them and I'm basically screaming while I'm walking into this library. So the volume thing is massive. And
Mm-hmm.
I just always thought that if someone just played the radio or something, like that would diffuse the
Yeah.
whole thing.
Yeah. Yeah. True. True.
Yeah.
I mean, in
Anyway,
this context, people were like like
yeah, I know.
in that context, like it was probably sending the right signal because that was the space for that. But like, we
Sure.
don't want like the recess to be, or we don't want the 5 minutes before a lecture starts to be the space for that.
Right, right. Yeah, exactly. So, all right, cool. So what do you think? So we talked about schools. What do you think? Like, do you do much in terms of? I mean, does your research focus on kids very much, or you've mostly been in university?
I've mostly been in university. Next year, I'm going to be joining a team at the University of Zurich where we're going to be going into
Ah,
schools. So I'm very excited to have like, because like obviously it's harder. I've very much been like working on my own grants also during my PhD and like my own projects, and like had limited access. Like students were just like who I had access to.
sure.
And I'm going to be working with teens next year, and I'm excited to get the opportunity to do that.
Yeah. Okay. Tell us about what you're going to be up to.
Well, that's still up in the air.
Okay. Okay.
But yeah, just media effects in schools as well, like in
Yeah.
like
Okay.
very broad terms.
Yeah. This is cool. This is the start of an important career. Does it feel like that? Like, I guess people join. You think like I want to do something impactful, like this is jumping headfirst into something with impact.
Yeah, I guess more and more. I think it's also exciting that more and more people like are collaborating on these topics because it's like it's evolving so quickly, and as I like mentioned, it's like so hard to measure, and it's like everywhere. Phones are everywhere. We're using them in so many different ways. It's like so complex, so we need the mass too, like of
Hmm.
people researching it and talking to each other and exchanging, and I'm excited by that development.
Yeah, I'm going to throw you a question just completely out of the blue, so
Okay.
you can reject it if you like. That's completely
Okay.
fine. But yesterday, so we had this debate on like, are we lying to ourselves in positive psychology? That was the debate yesterday between Todd from George Mason, who I guess is representing psychology, and Airy Mountbatten O'Malley, who's a philosopher. And I guess
Hmm.
part of the discussion was around like, sometimes do we actually need science for some of these things? And we could basically answer a bunch of stuff just kind of philosophically, like basically, do we think that this is good? And if we don't, then let's not do it. That kind of idea.
Hmm.
I do wonder, like, if we're saying like this is so hard to precisely research, like, is there much overlap with like, well, I mean, like, even like, say, we've already talked about a little bit the philosophy and the ethics of banning something. Is there much overlap between the psychologists who are saying there's these deleterious impacts on well-being, but do we ethically think we have the right to remove phones, or I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, like, I guess
Well,
another way,
yeah.
I know this is confusing, but it's like, I guess what I'm saying is like, do we even need the research? Let's just limit this. But obviously that's not really how the world works these days.
Yeah, it is a good question though, because I think they're there's also this question of like how much harm is enough harm to decide that something is like worth banning or regulating. I think that in the term, like if we're talking about schools, I'm very sure that like pro ban 100%, because like I think that the question we need to approach is from the other direction, as I pointed out earlier. Like why would they need a phone
Hmm.
before like
Hmm.
considering like anything else? Like they don't need one. There are negative consequences. We don't need to have it in this space.
Like, and that's almost sorry to interrupt, but that's almost, I guess, what maybe the area was pointing to, was this idea of like, you can basically outline a million reasons why not to have it. You can't really point me any reasons to have it. that's a discussion we can just basically have. It's not necessarily requiring more research.
Yeah, and then I guess more research. Yeah, I'm assuming like more research is there because like there are other places where policies need to be pushed, and I guess there the statistics are more important to get like movements to happen.
Sure.
And yeah, that would probably be the argument there. But yeah, it's an interesting question. I mean, I think when it comes to like banning in the areas that I mentioned earlier, like be it like if you like the same point that I made for schools, like do we need a phone in this situation? What is our goal in this situation? We don't need a phone in this situation, like family dinners, for example. Like I don't know that we need, like it would be great to have research on that. I'm not saying we don't need research on that, but like I don't think that we need research on that to implement that.
Yeah. It's like, is it something that, I don't know if this is true or not. So this is something I probably saw while on my phone while ignoring someone. But like you don't dream about phones or something like that. Like they're not like evolutionary, like part of our, I don't know if that's a thing or not.
I've never heard that.
Okay. So look, it's probably made up, but it's, but where I'm trying to go with this is like, it's, I think if you ask anyone, like, what was an ideal childhood? Like if you had to map out, if you're a parent and you had to map out like this idyllic childhood that you'd like to give for your kids, or sort of like retrospectively, what was ideal about your childhood? Like where did phones come into that? I don't think they did. I think where they were enablers, like they were enablers in terms of, texting and calling, rather than like old, like home landlines and stuff, calling each other's houses. But after that, it's like, who's thinking like, I'd love for my kid to go to restaurants and take photos of their food. Man, that would be the best childhood.
That would really increase. Yeah, it would really increase their well-being. They would be so happy. They'd have all these memories of all the meals that they'd have.
Yeah, they'd get heaps of likes. They'd get so many likes.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's interesting. And then like if you were like, as you were saying, then you can think about the like flip side. Like if you do give your kid a phone, think about all the things that you're inviting in. Like there's like all the risks that the internet involves. Like when you give a kid a phone, like there's a risk of them seeing content that they should not be seeing, that they're not ready to be seeing, and you're putting them in contact with strangers. Like there's so much danger with giving a child a phone, and so many negative things associated. And then there's the opportunity cost of like, you would rather them be probably doing something else, being creative, playing with other kids, doing their homework, anything else probably.
Yeah. No, I specifically remember like my wife was pregnant and we're at the scan, like, yep, you're having a daughter. Congratulations. And I think like that minute of my wife was like, what are we going to do about phones? Like literally, she was like, what? That was, I mean, she's a school teacher, so maybe she's thinking about schools. But it was like the minute we found out, she goes, what are we going to do?
Yeah. No, it's very scary. It's very scary. And I wrote down the statistic to mention earlier. I was like, that's one to drop, that I feel like if people are scared, like the average age of a child to see pornography for the first time is 12 years old.
I know. Okay.
And that's the average, which means like people are seeing it way younger. And also like I heard the statistic that like above the age of 12, like children will probably be like, the ones who see it that are above 12 are probably like seeking it out of some curiosity, but under 12, kids are like seeing it on accident. And it happens so fast. I have this example of my little brother, who I hope he's okay with me telling this story. He was like maybe 10 and he was playing with my mom's phone, and he like was with his friends and they said something like, Siri, am I sexy? And Siri went like Googling sexy. And the phone was locked. So my mom just got a surprise when she unlocked her phone and the problem was like quickly resolved. But that shows like how quickly like a kid who's just being silly, who's not seeking that out, who doesn't even have like, who's probably not ready for that, could come across like such content. And then there's like other content, like, like violent content and so forth that like quickly appears.
No, I mean, I wasn't even going to bring it up, but you're exactly right. The fact that, like, say in Australia, we're talking about having this, actually, I think it even passed. I don't know what it's up to, but banning social media, like basically meaning that if you're under 16 or something, you can't even have an account, or whatever age, I don't even know. But the fact that we're having this conversation and not saying the same stuff for pornography is just unbelievable. Like I need to find someone who can talk about this on the podcast. But no, you're exactly right. And so yeah, I guess my last question is really like, what have we missed? Is there anything that I haven't asked?
I'm looking at no, I don't think so. I think like in terms of like negative consequences, we didn't really go through them. We just like phones are not great. We didn't really like talk about like what potentially there is.
All right, let's finish.
I just mentioned the potential like access to like content that we don't want to see. Like we could consider like misinformation.
Hmm.
Like online bullying is something, privacy concerns, and then like negative consequences. Like there are all the consequences that potentially could occur on like mental health and well-being. There's like all this debate between like, like is it really social media, or is it people who are like who are unwell in the first place, who are like using social media more? Either case is probably like not a good sign. Like if people like are using social media a lot when they're not well, then like this is also a concern. Consequences on sleep, physical activity, I like to say also like death, like directly, because like texting and driving is, can lead to death of multiple people. Like I said, like an extreme case scenario, but it happens a lot. So like there are really like a lot of, as maybe like I was talking about kids, that's maybe not the case too much
Sure. Sure.
for children's use, but like those are like some of the list of consequences. And then I did also write down, because I know you had asked the question regarding like usefulness of like educational games, and I had a response to that because
Yeah,
recently
let's
there was
go.
a researcher, Jennifer Zosh, who came to Georgetown and gave a talk, and she has this paper where they like looked at the 100 most downloaded educational games, and she mentioned, and this is something that I would have never thought of, that like, well, like anyone can label an app as educational. Like it
Really?
doesn't have to pass some kind of test, which like I think like a lot of parents would assume that, like there's some kind of like, like lord up there who's like, this is educational, this is not educational. But it's just like the developer who will be like, this is educational. And they evaluated these apps and they scored very, very low. And the free apps scored even lower, because you can imagine that
Scored on what? On their ability to
on
educate, or like
yeah, they had
safety?
like they create on not safety, ability to educate. And they had
Okay.
like a scale that they created for this. And they, overall scored pretty low on this. And the free apps were like scoring particularly bad when I think it came to some kind of like attention measure, because the kids were probably being distracted by like ads. So, and I thought that blew my mind kind of, because I had never thought about that aspect regarding phones. And
Hmm.
then like one last thing I would say is probably like we talk about phone bans, we talk about all these things, and we did talk about youth quite a bit, which is not yet at least my specialty. But I think it's also interesting to consider like bringing in education for this, like into schools, like how like to deal with misinformation, what is appropriate behavior or not online. Because like we talked about like inappropriate and appropriate behavior of like phone use
Hmm.
in certain situations, which should probably be a conversation as well. But then there should be a space where people are taught about the dangers that are associated with phone and internet use further. And it doesn't have to be like a weekly class necessarily, but maybe that should be introduced before phones are introduced in schools.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm just thinking, yeah, exactly. I'm just thinking that even in a classroom, like my kids aren't at school yet, so I'm not quite there, but it's like the variety, like the variance basically must be huge. That you can get a phone, like you're talking about, kind of like let's at least prepare kids to have a phone, and let's talk about, what are desirable social norms and what's not, and how to deal with the information, whatever. But it's like you could probably have kids rocking up in like, I don't know. Like, I don't know what the youngest would be. Maybe but as in you could have like year twos or something with a
Yeah.
phone, maybe not.
Yeah.
And
No,
then other
yes,
kids who
that
don't get them
exists.
until really.
Yeah, that exists. Yeah. Somebody this year they told me they took it away then, but it was somebody who told me, it was kind of a funny story. The person was given like 2 extra phones, like when they went to buy their phone, like it was like some
Okay.
deal. And he didn't like think it through, and he
That's
just gave
big
it to his
phone.
children.
That's
Yeah.
big phone
It's a big phone.
trying to steal your kids. Yeah.
And he didn't think about it, and he just gave it to his kids, and then he noticed that like it was not having a positive effect, so he took them away again. And he was pretty funny. He said he brought it back to the store, and the man was like, but they're free. And he was like, I don't want them, take them back, please. Like we do
Really?
not want these in our. And this was someone who like like was not particularly like involved in like or involved at all in this space of research in this area. I thought that was fascinating. Like like that, yeah, he wouldn't have known better in that situation. He immediately noticed a negative effect, but you could
Yeah.
imagine that some people might not.
No,
And
and it's
it
funny.
also it creates like a social divide too, between like people who are potentially informed, people who have time as well.
Yeah.
Like like you need to have time to notice that like your kid is spending too much time on the
Sure.
phone, or that it's not good for them. So it's creating, I think, it's probably accentuating like a divide in society as well.
Okay, so this is a completely ridiculous hypothetical exaggeration, but like let's just say that same story again, but remove phone and say gun. You know, like all right, they're not as dangerous as a gun, right?
Yeah.
But this idea of like I don't want these in my house. These are
Yeah.
not useful for us and our family.
Yeah.
I'm not
Yeah.
like I'm not saying it should people have it shouldn't have guns in their house, whatever. But like
Yeah.
you know that you put them locked up so that your kids don't reach them.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm trying to think of a different analogy that
That
could be
was a
used.
stupid thing to say, probably, but
But yeah, I mean, I think in general, like I think Jonathan Haidt might mention that in his book, but like you don't like you just don't give whatever to play with. Like you don't hand your child just like whatever toy.
Mm.
And like if it wasn't safe. And there are many reasons to believe that for children, at least, phones have at least certain elements of unsafety.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think now I'm just getting stupid, but I was thinking like you wouldn't give like a stack of magazines to my son and be like, one of them is probably Playboy, but just like, try and find the sports magazine. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, yeah.
You just wouldn't do that, but that's what
No.
you're doing when you're giving him a phone.
No, and I mean, and that's the problem is like in the stack of magazines that would be easy for you to control, but like with the phone, it's so hard to control, and that's why probably you'd want to like avoid it at first, and at some point, you're gonna have to like hand it over, ideally in a more like controlled setting, like maybe don't let them have the phone all the time, like for all things, but yeah.
Yeah, very cool. And so, like, just, I mean, maybe I've taken us off track, but let's just summarize. Sorry. Let's just summarize with, this conversation, I guess, started with the impact of phones on, like, would you say social well-being or on generally mental health?
I'd say
Like,
social
send
well-being
us away
probably.
with a takeaway message, is what I'm saying.
Okay. I would say if you are in a social situation, even if you are feeling uncomfortable, put down your phone and attempt to start a conversation with someone. You will probably feel better. And if not, just try again. And I also like, even if it's a bad experience, it will be something worth sharing. Like if you go up to a stranger and you try talking to them and it's a bad experience, you can then like go and tell someone else about it and that will create a social interaction. While if you just hang out on your phone, that's probably going to be a harder conversation starter to be like, well, I saw this TikTok meme.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. All right, that was perfect. All right. Thank you very much. This has been great. You're taking me into all these different directions, but I am starting to notice there's like a type of person, and maybe I'm this person too. It's like you can't have a conversation without referencing memes and videos. Like as in like, oh, did you see this thing? I gotta show you this video. Like it's like your whole, even if you are having an interaction, it actually relies on you showing them stuff that they probably don't even care about.
Yeah, I've definitely been that person as well.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
it's like it's big.
It's
Anyway,
big. Yeah. Yeah. I think it's a fascinating thing. Like another going in a slightly different direction is also to consider like how much like I remember noticing it like phones and like how we communicate with each other becoming like something that's well addressed in movies and TV shows, but also like lyrics of songs. Like,
oh
like I'm
really?
waiting for like, like you're mentioning like being ghosted is now suddenly a theme in a song, which it wouldn't have been like 10 years ago, 20 years ago. Yeah, very fascinating to see that shift as well.
Ah, interesting. I am going to be that person now and say there is that funny thing about is like there's a song, I think it's like I can't remember, it's like Kelly Rowland or something, and she's like upset that someone's not texting her back, but in the video she's like typing on Excel on her phone.
Oh yeah, yeah, I know which song you're talking about. I can't sing, so I'm not gonna sing it, but I have it in my head.
Anyway, but yeah, no, that's funny. I guess I'm not really up to date with the latest music and stuff, but that's interesting that it's happening. There you go.
Yeah,
All right, well, thank you very much. Just let that go into a complete mess, I think, at the end there, and just talk about whatever ridiculous things popped into my head. Thank you so much for your time. Where do people find
with
you?
pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah, no worries. Where could be? Well, you're obviously you're skipping town. You're going back home. I
Yeah.
don't know if are you from Zurich or
No, I'm from the French speaking part. So
okay.
I'm gonna be, and I'm also gonna go into I'm kind of excited, the media and communications department. I'm a
Oh, cool.
psychologist. So I'm kind of like excited to see a different take on the same subject from other researchers. Where people can find me, I guess primarily like on LinkedIn would probably be the place
Yeah,
that
yeah,
I would
yeah.
I would say to look me up or email me, but let me think.
Your email's about to change. Yeah.
Yeah, my email's about to change. So I was like, you can email me at carliochs@bluin.ch. I'm not going to give the university one, but I'm currently at Georgetown, will be at the University of Zurich.
Awesome. Well, this is really fascinating stuff. And yeah, what are you going to do if you get to the media team and they're all pro phone and
They're
they
not.
don't? Okay.
They're not. They're not. I mean, no, they're not.
Okay.
But I mean, if then I
Telling.
guess it would be a
Telling.
great debate.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks again.
Thank you.